Thank you so much. I'm so pleased that some of you were able to turn out so early. We advanced an hour last night, and so everyone is a little bit sleepy still, but you're very kind to have come out this morning. My name is William Beeman. I am an anthropologist, and I am going to be giving you 4 lectures during the course of the next couple of weeks until Sri Lanka on traditional performing arts in Southeast Asia. The first performing art that I want to talk to you about is Bangsawan in Malaysia. This is a performance form that you probably never have heard of. And in fact, even if you ask a number of Malaysians or Singaporeans about Bangsawan, many of them will have heard of it but may never have seen it. But the Bangsawan is a growing and very popular performance form that is established in Singapore today and also in other parts of Malaysia. But before we start to talk about Bangsawan in particular, I want to talk to you a little bit about the anthropological approach to theater and performance. In anthropology, we are, of course, concerned with humanity. We're concerned with all human beings everywhere and what human beings do. One of the things that we know is that all cultures in the world that we know have some kind of performance tradition. And so that is a universal. And the most amazing thing about it is that human beings in different societies will spend enormous amounts of time and energy training, sometimes for years, in order to be able to produce performance that will be of interest and enjoyment for the people of their own society. So why is that? Well, our speculation is that people like to see themselves. They like to see themselves reflected in the performances that are produced for them. They enjoy seeing their cultural values, their religious values, their ritual values reflected in people who are showing it to them in a way like a social mirror. And so when we take a look at performance, we can look at it as a way of analyzing and understanding the deeper values and deeper structures of a particular society. Identity and self-image become really essential in performance. Now, the other thing that people really enjoy seeing and doing is performance that extends and also shows the extremes of the abilities of human beings in their behavior. So acrobatics, for instance, is an extreme physical exercise. And vocal performance in opera. As a friend of mine once said, he said, "I like opera." And I said, "Oh, really? What do you like about opera?" And he said, "Well, I like tenors, and I like sopranos." And then I said, "So what do you like about tenors and sopranos?" And then he thought for a minute, and he thought, "What I really like is high notes." And that's not uncommon. We like to see people who are able to do extraordinary things on stage because that shows, in a way, the limits of our humanity, the limits of our physical capabilities and our abilities to display ourselves for other people in an effective manner. So it seems to be, for almost all societies, very worthwhile to spend years and years and years training to develop these specializations. And of course, we've seen here on this stage, we've seen some extraordinary performers so extraordinary that most of you would say, well, I could never do that. And that's part of the point in performance, in viewing performance, because it tells you that it's something that humans could theoretically do, but maybe you couldn't do it and without the training that's necessary. So I want to show you a little news clip from Singapore television that talks about a particular performance of Bangsawan that was developed for Singapore National Day. And we'll be talking a little bit more about this specific performance later on in the lecture. The performance is a Bangsawan performance that focuses on the legendary figure Sang Nila Utama. Sang Nila Utama is the legendary founder of Singapore. And for Singapore National Day, having a play that is focused on Sang Nila Utama is a way that the Malay community in Singapore announces to itself and maybe to the rest of the world that Singapore is really Malay, okay? Now, this might be a news flash for some people who think of Singapore as largely Chinese or largely Indian or even an amalgam of all of these cultures. So now let's take a look. The newscaster, this is not translated, I'm sorry, but the newscaster is saying that the performance has been arranged for Singapore National Day. You'll see a friend of mine, the head of the Singapore Opera Academy, who talks about the symbolism and about the performance and the production that they undertook. But mostly I'd like you to take a look and get a little bit of a sample of the kinds of things that go on stage. Sorry. I'm new to this clicker, sorry.
Kisah pengasas Kerajaan Singapura, Sang Nila Utama, akan dipentaskan dalam bentuk
Could we have the sound up a little bit?
Hari Kebangsaan. Wartawan kami Nur Helmi Hakim menjenguk ke belakang tabir Pesta Bangsawan Singapura. Laporan ini saudara mengakhiri berita untuk malam ini. Sehingga berjumpa lagi. Salam hormat.
Cerita rakyat terkenal Sang Nila Utama dipentaskan dalam bentuk bangsawan oleh kumpulan anggerik Temasek Bangsawan. Pementasan selama hampir 2 jam itu mengelungkar keturunan, warisan dan pengembaraan pengasas Kerajaan Singapura Sang Nila Utama lebih daripada kandungan yang biasanya diceritakan kepada halayak ramai. Menampilkan pelbagai aspek termasuk tarian dan nyanyian, pementasan ini diharap dapat menarik minat lebih banyak golongan masyarakat terhadap bangsawan.
Elemen-elemen bangsawan seperti bahasa, nada, lingkungan, adab, gerak dan deria, semuanya elemen-elemen ini akan dapat dilihat di dalam persembahan kita. Dan saya berasa berbesar hatilah yang anak-anak muda sekarang juga dapat memberikan penilaian yang amat tinggi apabila mereka berlakon dalam bangsawan seperti Sang Nila Utama.
Malah pementasan bangsawan ini juga selaras dengan sambutan Hari Kebangsaan pada bulan ini.
Pada masa Hari Kebangsaan ini, nilai atau semangat kebangsaan kita kan begitu tinggi sekali. Kita nak menyelaraskan semangat padu kita, semangat kerakyatan kita tu, dan kita cantumkan dengan storytelling atau bahan cerita Sang Nila Utama, satu cerita rakyat yang bukan saja dikenali oleh masyarakat Melayu tetapi masyarakat bukan Melayu dan rakyat Singapura secara amnya.
Persembahan Sang Nila Utama ini adalah surutan utama bagi Festival Bangsawan Singapura yang akan berlangsung bermula malam ini hingga 27 Ogos nanti. Antara kegiatan lain termasuklah pameran, forum dan juga...
So let's move on. So what is Bangsawan? The word Bangsawan literally means noble person or nobility. And the plays that are produced in Bangsawan, in this opera tradition, are in fact focused a lot on noble characters and on nobility. Now, it's important for us to understand that Malaysia and Malaya, before the name that was before modern Malaysia, is actually a federation of sultanates, and there are in fact 5 sultans who rotate their leadership of the nation as heads of state. Singapore was potentially one of these sultanates, but Singapore decided not to join the federation. So historically, Singapore is also united with the rest of Malaysia. But the idea of a royal presence, a rotating royal presence, is still very much an important part of Malay identity. And so Bangsawan deals with and shows this focus on nobility and on noble characters. So it is a popular theater which combines drama, music, singing, and dance. And one of the things that is really unusual about Bangsawan in Southeast Asia, there are several things. First of all, this is theater that is produced by Muslims. And that is an extremely rare situation in the Islamic world. So Muslim theater is not a thing that is widely seen in theater traditions. Second of all, Bangsawan is a commercial theater. Most of the things that we see in terms of Southeast Asian drama, and I'm going to be talking about many of these things, are either based in religious ritual, or they're based in court performances, things that took place before royalty and were commissioned and supported by royalty. Bangsawan is different. Bangsawan is unabashedly, and has been from the very beginning, commercial. It was established as a popular entertainment and continued to be a popular entertainment down to the present day, with people going to theaters, actually buying tickets in order to be entertained. So this makes it, as I say, unique in the performance traditions that we find throughout Southeast Asia. It developed as an urban entertainment rather than a rural entertainment, and many of the traditions, especially the religious performance traditions, take place in rural areas, but this is an urban phenomenon. So why does it matter that we care about Bangsawan? Well, first of all, it was the first established Malay language theater, and for that reason alone, it is extremely important. There was no Malay language theater before Bangsawan came into being in the 19th century. And it is a modern public entertainment. It is linked to commerce, to mobility, and also reflects popular tastes in a very direct way. So the genre also influenced later performance forms: film, popular music, popular theater. So it had an enormous influence on popular culture entirely throughout Singapore and Malaysia. The influence today may seem to be somewhat muted, but in the past it was formative in dealing with these kinds of things. So, how did it happen? How did it occur? Well, Bangsawan arose in Penang, which we'll be visiting. We'll be docking in Georgetown on Penang Island. And Bangsawan emerged in Penang as a port city, but also in other port cities. And it showed the influence of migration, of trade, and of cultural exchange that took place in that area. So steamship travel in the 19th century was active in these port cities, bringing trade to various other places. But what it also brought was entertainers. As the trade routes expanded, entertainers came along with the trade routes. And the principal influence for Bangsawan was a very robust tradition, Parsi theater from India. The Parsis, you may know, are Zoroastrians. They're not Hindus, they're not Buddhists, and they're not Muslims. They are Zoroastrians, and they have largely been established in Bombay and also in Gujarat in western India. And Parsi theater is an enormous tradition in India, very popular, and for many people in India, the Parsi theater bypasses some of the restrictions that might be found in other religious communities. Parsi theater is the very important basis for Bollywood film. So when we see a Bollywood film, we can understand that its roots are in the Parsi theater of Bombay and Gujarat. So Parsi theater embodies both text, music, and dance. And it's this fusion of text, music, and dance that is actually the basis for, well, it's the basis for most of the theater in the world, including Western opera and musical theater and operetta. But the fusion of these things was something that these troops, the Parsi troops, eventually brought to the port cities of Malaysia. And this was during the British colonial period. So British colonialism in Malaysia was an important vehicle for bringing these troops, these Parsi troops, to these port cities. And the Parsi theater coming from India introduced the proscenium stage to Malaysia. It introduced melodramatic spectacle, elaborate scenery, elaborate costumes, and these performers adapted then the elements into Malay theater. So Bangsawan is the result of Parsi theater being grafted into Malay society, becoming Malay theater in Malay language, but with Malay themes and stories that actually reflected the society and the interests and the values of Malaysians. So the Parsis, the Parsi theater was the root of Bangsawan, but it was also the root for the flourishing of Bangsawan as an independent theater tradition. So it localized, Bangsawan localized this foreign theatrical model rather than copying them wholesale. So in the early development, Penang served as the crucial hub for the development of Bangsawan and these early Bangsawan troops. But by the 1880s, you had localized troops that were firmly established and were extremely profitable. There were no movie theaters then. This was an important popular entertainment. People got quite wealthy as a result of the production of Bangsawan performances in the late 19th century. And it really was a kind of opera for Malays. And then it soon spread to Singapore and to other cities throughout the Malay Peninsula. This is my colleague, Sui Ben Tan. And Sui Ben Tan is the doyenne. She is the real expert on Bangsawan, from whom I've learned a tremendous amount. This is her book here. And what she points out is that tradition is not necessarily merely a repetition of and preservation of things from the past that are brought into the present as a kind of museum piece. But tradition is an evolving process. That is, as society evolves, you need to produce performance forms that also produce an evolution in taste, an evolution in social perspective, an evolution in one's own self-identification. So when we talk about the Bangsawan tradition, we are talking about something that is not merely concretized in ancient tradition, but rather something that continues to evolve day by day and on into the present. So the tradition is seen as an historical process, not as a fixed inheritance. So let's take a look at the structure of a Bangsawan performance. The Bangsawan performance then is a series of scenes that alternate with music and dance. Now, what is most interesting about this is that, kind of like what we see in many performance traditions that use music and dance as an interlude between dramatic scenes, this is what happens in Bangsawan as well. If you take a look in opera or music theater in the West, you see that musical interludes in the drama are usually an expansion of emotion. That is, somebody is for instance, in Oklahoma. I grew up in Oklahoma, and it is required that every high school student perform in Oklahoma before they can graduate. So it's required. So take, for example, in Oklahoma, the very famous Agnes DeMille scene, Laurie's dream scene. So Laurie is emotionally conflicted, and she has a dream sequence, where she takes she has something she gets from Ali the peddler that is a kind of aromatic salts, I think that's right. And she goes off into a dream sequence. The dream sequence, the dance sequence, is an expansion of her inner emotional state. And that's precisely what goes on in Bangsawan as well. And the formula from Parsi theater that got translated into Bollywood productions, Bollywood film productions, is 6 songs and 7 dances. That's why Bollywood films are 4 hours, 5 hours long, because they have to have 6 songs and 7 dances. But each one of them represents something that is relevant to the stage drama, but at the same time an emotional expansion. And this is what happens in Bangsawan as well. However, one of the innovations in Bangsawan is that the musical interludes oftentimes are completely out of historical context. So you'll have an event taking place in some mythical historical past, and then the musical event comes on with a popular singer singing a contemporary popular song. It may be relevant directly to the play, but it is a popular vehicle rather than something that is period in the area of the actual drama. So these scripts remain flexible, and that's another important feature of Bangsawan and actually most theater that you find throughout Asia. That is that the actors are not stuck adhering specifically to a script. They're very good at understanding their audience, and if the audience is bored, I hope you're not bored, by the way. If the audience is bored, then they will reduce the script and move on quickly. If the audience seems to be really into what they're doing, they can expand the script. And so the performances don't have a fixed length necessarily. And this innovation is one of the important skills that actors have in improvisatory forms like this. The stagecraft is part of the performance. So having elaborate scenes, elaborate sets, very dramatic transitions between scenes is also an important part of how this works. So these visual transformations become especially important in the storytelling and in the emotional arc of the performances. So now let me stop for a minute and tell you how Bangsawan has actually evolved into the present day. It deals largely with historical and legendary themes that are directly related to Malay history, Malay legends, Malay culture. But the plays have also been expanded to include themes from other cultural traditions. So, for instance, one of the most popular Bangsawan performances is Alibaba, a Middle Eastern story that you all know from the 1001 Nights. Another one, which actually you find pretty much throughout Asia, is Layla and Majnun. Layla and Majnun comes from a Persian, from a Persian tradition, and it's a story of two star-crossed lovers that ends in tragedy. But in recent years, we've also seen, for instance, Cinderella and other Western fairy tales that have been put together. Robin Hood is another one that has been seen on the Bangsawan stage. So these, incorporating foreign materials into the themes of Bangsawan is especially important, and the play that I'm going to focus on, Sang Nila Utama, is actually one of the traditional and important legends of the founding of the state of Singapore, the island of Singapore, and that Sang Nila Utama was developed specifically by the Singapore Opera Academy, and now it is one of the most popular things that they actually do. So, in the 19th century, there were actually touring troupes. If you could do and make a lot of money doing performances on a fixed stage in a fixed theater, the touring troupes took their performances to the countryside as well. And this spread the performance throughout the region. And the economic survival of these companies depended on their reputation. As a result, you ended up with stars, with actual people who would be advertised in advance. They would come to town just like a touring Broadway troupe with a famous headliner who would come, and this would attract the attention of people, and they would flock to see these performances. So the touring encouraged this stylistic innovation and also regional exchange throughout the area. Now, the repertoire that I already mentioned, some of the themes that we find in the Bangsawan performances. They feature court scenes because Bangsawan means nobility, and they also have romance, and they're also comic performances that deal with comic stories that are well known to people in Malaysia. So the foreign settings provide a kind of an exoticism that is also extremely interesting and important. So the language of Bangsawan is reflective of the kinds of performance traditions that we find in throughout Southeast Asia and also elsewhere. Some of you may have seen the wayang kulit puppets that we that we saw in the museums, or you saw in earlier lectures that we had my colleagues have produced here. Wayang Kulit's shadow puppets involve a dual linguistic stratum. So you have the noble characters, which are actually speaking in a language that is Sanskritized and almost no one understands. But at the same time, you have comic characters, and the comic characters speak in the vernacular and are interpreting the more elevated language of the noble characters. This is the same in Bangsawan. You don't have that really stark division, but the noble characters speak in very noble, very highly elevated language, and the comic characters speak in the vernacular, and they are oftentimes talking to the audience, interpreting what's going on stage, saying, "Oh, it looks like the king is really mad now," or I bet the king wishes he hadn't said that, and in that way, you get a direct connection with the audience through the comic characters, whereas they are looking at the noble characters as embodying these great virtues and great social values. So the vocal delivery varies then according to how the characters rank in the context of the story. Music is also essential because you have dance sequences and you have song sequences. So musicians have to be able to entertain and also carry the structure of the performance along. The music is dynamic, it is organic with the performance. So the interludes and things that underlie the actual vocal production, the spoken vocal production, carry over into the musical production. So the role of the orchestra is especially important in the overall production of the Bangsawan. And this practice later influenced Malay popular music. So Malay popular ensembles were largely developed during this period of Bangsawan's growth. So it quite naturally, since we had songs and dances, the Malay recording industry depended on the development of Bangsawan in its early days. So the Bangsawan performers became the first people who were actually recorded on Malay traditional vinyl and traditional musical production for the distribution of music and song. The theater songs then circulated widely beyond the performing venues, much as, for instance, 1930s musicals generated popular songs that become part of the American songbook. The same dynamic is true in Malaysia. So dance in Bangsawan marks these celebrations, these transitions, expansion of emotion, and also courtly scenes embody dancers all the time, and it's assumed that there are court dancers in just about every venue, and they become very important. The vocabulary reflects hierarchy and also the character type that's going on. So let's take a look at a little bit of a dance sequence.
Umpama bulan di pada bintang.
And there's the Sultan approving of the dances. Costumes reflect rank and status within the hierarchy of the stories that are produced, and they can be extremely elaborate. That's part of the part of the spectacle that is presented for audiences, having elaborate costumes that are really very well produced and much elevated above everyday dress that people normally produce. Headgear becomes especially important because in Bangsawan, especially when taking place in open air settings, it's maybe hard to see the characters. But the headgear tells you who is a noble person and who is a comic character or a low character. So having the elaborate headgear as an identifying feature of these characters becomes one of the more important costume features that we see. The warriors, the rulers, and the commoners are distinguished by what they actually put on their heads. And the character types are, of course, I've already mentioned, noble characters, comic characters, and the contrast between these characters produces the tension that we find in these performances. This is something that even Shakespeare knew, so that in even the Shakespearean tragedies, you always had comic characters to provide a little bit of a relief from the extreme drama that you find. So, women performers are extremely important in Bangsawan. And once again, let me emphasize, this is theater that is produced in a Muslim society. And the presence of a large number of female performers in Muslim society is rare. When I was last in Singapore, I actually sat in a festival production of Bangsawan. I was seated next to the Minister of Islamic Affairs for Singapore. And he turned to me and he said, I want you to note that you're not going to see this kind of performance in any other Islamic society. And that was something that he wanted me to know, which I thought was especially important. And it is true that female performers are essential, central, and especially important in this particular performance tradition. And it is rare. You simply don't find it in other Islamic societies to the extent that you find in Bangsawan. So the visibility of female performers and the fact that some of them became absolute celebrities helped to shape social attitudes toward women in Malaysian society. And you do find that in Malaysian society, women do have a status that is far more elevated than in more traditional Islamic societies, like, for instance, in the Middle East. So stardom gave tremendous success not only to the women themselves, but also to people who aspired to success and aspired to social status within the society. Now I'd like to turn to the play that I was going to be talking about, and I think we're going to hear about Sang Nila Utama probably several times today if you attend this lecture, because it is the foundational legend for the state of Singapore. So Sang Nila Utama. Sang is an honorific title, kind of like Sir or the Honorable. Nila is an interesting word. It either means blue, or it also refers to the moon. And Utama is great. So Sang Nila is Sir Great Moon, I guess. And he is a legendary figure from Sumatra. And this is the legend of the founding of Singapore. So I'm going to give you the synopsis of the play, and then show you a little clip from the Bangsawan performance that shows two important scenes from the actual play. So Sang Nila Utama is the principal figure, and he's destined for kingship. Now, one of the other things that is important about this is that Paramiasuri is the queen mother, and she plays an extraordinarily important role in the legend, but also in the Bangsawan performance. So then Behendara is the chief priest who advises Sang Nila Utama, and Panglima is his general who accompanies him on his adventures. Then there are court attendants and others who are part of the chorus and the dance sequences that take place, and the spirit of the sea that plays a very important role. In many cases, the spirit of the sea is a non-speaking role. In this particular Bangsawan performance, though, the spirit of the sea is very much in attendance and is also very important. And finally, there's the lion. And the lion is the Singha, and it's the lion, Singha Pura, that gives the name to Singapore. So let's take a look at the story. The Act 1, the first episode, the court celebrates Sang Nila Utama's coming of age. The ministers sing of his royal ancestry and his divine descent, and the Queen Mother reminds the prince that kingship requires wisdom and other kinds of virtues. So this would be the first sequence. Then there'd be a dance. Then the call of the sea. Sang Nila Utama announces his decision to voyage from Sumatra into the sea to a new land that is worthy of just rule. So the priest warns him that an adventure of this kind requires sacrifice. So you can't just, go and conquer someplace. There also has to be a personal sacrifice. So in the third episode, Sang Nila Utama is on the sea, and a terrible storm comes up, and so the spirit of the sea appears symbolically, and the priest says there must be a sacrifice, a test of kingship. Well, in maybe some other traditions, you might have an animal or a human sacrifice. No, Sang Nila Utama throws his crown into the ocean, and that immediately calms the waters. So the sacrifice that he's made is the crown on his head as a way of pacifying this. So upon landing, the prince and his followers encounter this majestic lion, and then there are dances that embody the animal's power and the dignity, and the Behendara interprets the vision as a sign of sovereign destiny. So Sang Nila Utama acknowledges the appearance of the lion and immediately declares the island of Temasek to be Singapura, the land of the lion. Now, folks, there are no lions in Singapore. It might have been a tiger, but there are no lions. So this is a very interesting kind of wrinkle. But you'll see lion symbolism all over the place in Singapore, because that's the name of the place. So that is an important wrinkle in what we're doing here. So eventually then, Sang Nila Utama is ascends to the throne, and he takes on the title of Sri Tribuna, the Lord of Three Lands. And the Lord of Three Lands are Sumatra, Java, and Singapore. And again, for Malays in Singapore, it's important for people to understand that their historic and symbolic and personal identification is tied in with the fact that at one point that their ancestor was the ruler, the king, over all three lands. Susan yesterday gave a wonderful lecture on the various kingdoms that were found in this part of the world in ancient times. And this is reflective of that situation. So let's take a look at this little clip that will show you. First of all, the sea. So they're received the terrible storm in the sea. There he throws the crown into the sea, and here comes the spirit of the sea and calms things down. Now here they are on the Tamasek.
Apa bunyinya itu?
What's that sound? Follow it. I've clearly seen an animal. Its head is black with a red body and a white chest.
Kehitam-hitaman. Merah badannya. Putih dadanya. Apa nama binatang serupa itu? Ada petik mendengar dahulu kala.
I heard about it a long time ago. Such a beast is called a lion.
Patutlah tempat ini diperbuat negeri.
We should make this place a state due to the presence of the mighty beast. And mention that Tamasek is now Singapura. And convey the regards to Her Majesty, my mother.
Tiadalah padukan anda berbalik ke Bintan lagi.
I will not return to Bintan anymore, for I have created a state in Tamasek.
Jikalau ada kasih bonda, hamba minta
I beseech
sekalian rakyat
Her Majesty's affection in sending subjects as elephants and horses,
bonda pun tuan hamba bawa sekali.
And also fetch Her Majesty as well. So all of you then follow me, and this is the founding of Singapore. And then there's a coronation scene afterwards. So I have just about run out of time, and I'm sorry to do this, but I wanted to make just a little reference to the Singapore Opera Academy, which is, unfortunately, I had hoped that we'd be able to maybe even arrange a visit to the Singapore Opera Academy. They have been so successful that they are now moving their headquarters into a much, much larger rehearsal space and a performance space. And so they're unavailable this weekend, and to my great regret. But they produce education for young people and for adults in this tradition, so that the tradition is going to continue as a result of the efforts of the Singapore Opera Academy, and they will continue to do outreach to communities throughout Malaysia. And I'm so delighted and happy for the success that they have had in their outreach efforts and in the development of festivals and other kinds of situations. They are now performing all the time. And this is largely supported through charitable contributions and through commercial ticket sales. So this is a theater that is actually becoming very, very successful. So Bangsawan demonstrates flexibility in tradition and in the adaptation and change that takes place, but it is also something that provides fundamental identification on the part of the audiences and the society with a truly Malay institution that is reflective of Malay cultural values and cultural identity. And for that reason alone, I think it's something that is really important for us to pay attention to. And when I'll be lecturing on other traditions, I'll be lecturing on Boria, another Malay tradition, for the next time I appear on this stage. Also Thai dance drama and Kandyan dancing in Sri Lanka. All of these reflect different cultural sensibilities, different cultural traditions, and they all require a really careful attention to the specific details of their origins and also their current performance forms. So I hope that you've enjoyed this discussion of something that you probably had not known about before, but will have maybe a chance in the future to actually experience yourself. So thank you very much.